We're looking for 100% success for 100% of kids in 100% of the time, in a subject where that success or failure, mathematics, is very unambiguous. You can see if they have succeeded or not. So that immediately invites the question, why is it that we can be so confident in shooting for that and for committing to that with the teachers and schools that we work with? What the knowledge is informs the type of communication, and it's basically more or less the same communication structure every single time, which means we don't have to learn, you don't have to learn tens of thousands of things to teach in mathematics. You only need to learn about 4. And that feels an awful lot more manageable. And I think a lot of people in society more broadly blame themselves when they don't understand something. I think there's probably a lot of insecurity going around about how smart people feel, possibly hang-ups from our experiences in school. And I think also, just as a casual observation of society, quite often people will answer questions, I found, when they don't know what the answer is, but someone's asked them for whatever reason, and then they'll give an answer, and they have no idea what the answer is. And then if their answer was unsatisfactory, I find myself like probing more. Wait, well, what about this? What about this? And I can almost see them starting to feel flustered and almost intimidated by that, because what's happening there is they're getting caught out. They're getting caught out in the live, having pretended they knew. And it's interesting that they feel like they have to pretend that they know. Whereas I've reached a point where I certainly go very much the other way around now. If I don't know or understand something, I'm not sure I ever blame myself for that. I always think that must be a function of the experience or what is being communicated to me.
Kris is the CEO of Unstoppable Learning, and I have personally been extremely excited by Unstoppable Learning since I heard about it, because I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about teaching, and I think the thing that excites me most is just the sheer ambition. So I'm really excited to introduce Kris today, who's the CEO of Unstoppable Learning. Previously, worked at Uplearn, and then before that, worked as a teacher at King's Salmon Academy and elsewhere. So without further ado, Kris, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. Thanks again, everyone, for having your cameras on. I do appreciate it. And with respect to the ambition that Phil was just talking about, so first and foremost, everything I'm talking about here is going to be set in the context of mathematics. I apologize that a couple of the examples are plucked from secondary mathematics, but not really very much. It'll still have a bit of a primary lens. But and I know Phil's got a bit of a question about this for me later, it can apply across other subjects as well. I'm just not going to share the concrete examples this time out. And usually when speaking with people about what our goal is, we'll describe it in terms of 100%. So we're looking for 100% success for 100% of kids in 100% of the time, in a subject where that success or failure, mathematics, is very unambiguous. You can see if they have succeeded or not. So that immediately invites the question, why is it that we can be so confident in shooting for that and for committing to that with the teachers and schools that we work with? Phil, do you mind turning on sharing for me, and then I'll get the presentation going?
Yes. Good point. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Thank you very much. So first things first, what's the core of everything we do is what's referred to as logically faultless communication. Very often, essentially what we've done is taken this term and then given it a bit of a simpler rebrand and terming it unstoppable learning. So if we want to use the academic language from the literature, logically faultless communication. If we want something a bit more colloquial and easy to get our heads around, this is what the goal is. This is the outcome that logically faultless communication provides. And the best way to explain what is meant by it is to show you. There'll be a little bit of interactivity here. So if you've got access to the chat feature, or maybe we'll have some mics off and shouting out, we'll go for that. But the way I'm going to try to demonstrate this is by teaching you now the meaning of the made-up word glurm. So, and I've got some sort of camera filter on, haven't I? Give me a moment. I'm going to have to stop share so I can see the camera setting. Oh, I don't have it. No, I didn't have a camera filter in the first place. We're all good. Here we go. This is glurm. So, mic's off. What is glurm? This is my AFL.
Waving something.
Waving something. Thank you very much, Amy. Did anybody think it meant something different?
I thought it might be something green.
Something green also comes up quite frequently. Anything else that it could have meant?
Green and squidgy.
Green and squidgy. Haven't had that one before, but I can see where that came from. Okay. Last two people. Users iPhone or NHARP. Would either of you like to give it a go?
I was going to say wafting.
Say that again, sorry? Wafting.
Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry, users iPhone is the only name we've got down there, so I don't actually know you one day. And it looks like you tried to unmute, but it hasn't worked. Okay, we'll progress. But we've got several different ideas there. And so we can look at this from two perspectives. One perspective is that you're just not a very smart group of people, and that's why you can't get what is so obviously the meaning of glurm. My demonstration couldn't have been clearer. Or the other perspective we could look at is, in many ways, you are surely the best possible group of people I could hope to teach. You're motivated enough to turn up after work in your own free time. You're all intelligent, educated adults. Maybe the fault did not lie in you and your brains. Maybe the fault lay somewhere in my teaching. So on screen now, I have various examples of what people have offered previously. And let's see if we can try and do this via the chat feature. Might be the easiest way to try and do this synchronously. But we've got several people who don't, sorry, two people on phones. It's going to make it harder for you. Let's try this. Could all of you go off mute now, please? Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to ask you to shout some things out in a moment based on what I do next. Because what I'm going to try and do next, I'm going to give this another go. I'm going to try and do a better job than I did the first time. So, first of all, this is glurm. This is not glurm. Which two number options did we just rule out?
5 and 6.
Yeah, 5 and 6.
Right. 5 and 6,
5 and
exactly
6.
correct. Thank you. Next time. If we can get it over Zoom, more synchronicity, but we'll give it a go. Next one. This is glurm. Which two options were just ruled out?
3 and 4.
3 and 4.
4.
Oh,
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Finally, this is not glurm. What is the last option that has just been ruled out?
Number 1.
1.
Number 1.
One. Brilliant. Okay. That is logically faultless communication. It's taking something where instead of having every mind in the room be uncertain or coming up with a range of different ideas about what your meaning might be, every mind in the room converges on the exact same interpretation. The only interpretation that is logically consistent with what was presented. I'm going to go through one more demonstration and use this second demonstration to exemplify one of the techniques that was used in the second sequence. So this time I'm going to teach you the meaning of the made-up word blurble. So first of all, see if there's a way to easily see my camera as well. So it'll help if I can see. There we go. Yeah, good. So I can make sure you can see what I need you to see. Okay, first of all, this is blurble. This is blurble. This is blurble. And this is blurble. What must you now logically conclude is the meaning of the word blurble?
A writing implement.
Absolutely, it's a writing implement. I have done this demonstration dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times now, hundreds, thousands of teachers, and every single time I get the same answer. A writing implement, something you write with. Sometimes people say it's a pen. I'm going to add one more example to that sequence. And as soon as I do, the meaning of the word blurble is going to transform before your mind's eye. And we're changing our minds about things all the time. It's very, very rare that somebody warns you in advance that you're about to change your mind about something. So this is a very special moment. Watch out for it. This is blurble. This is not blurble. What now must be the meaning of the word blurble?
A writing implement with a lid on.
With a lid on. Exactly correct. So what made all the difference? Because I showed you 4 examples of blurble and not one of you got it. Nobody ever gets it. What made the difference?
Seeing what
A
wasn't.
non-example. Exactly. A non-example, a negative example. Now, I'm going to show a practical example of how to make use of this because I'm going to hide myself here again. It used to be the case that if I were doing this demonstration 15 years ago, I'd take it further, but I'd often say to people, look, if nothing else, remember this one thing, make this one takeaway, use non-examples. We learn what things are, not just through examples of what they are, but through examples of what they are not. And 10 years ago, that was a revelation to people. Now, that idea, it's certainly at least in the secondary sector, I suspect in the primary as well, does seem to have proliferated quite a lot. I'm seeing a use of non-examples quite a bit now, and people talking about it. But you can use non-examples well, and you can use them not so well. So we're going to go into a bit more detail. Just before I do that, Phil asked that I explain a little bit more about what the unstoppable learning approach is and the ideas where it comes from. So a lot of it is rooted in the theory of instruction, applications and principles, written by Engelmann and Carnine. And it's an absolute magnum opus, an extraordinary, extraordinary book. I would love to recommend that all of you go away and read it. But there are very, very few people I'm aware of who've picked it up and tried to read it and have successfully made sense of it. It's not any fault of theirs. The book is almost written to be illegible. So much so, famously so, that in the foreword to its second edition, Rob Dixon said, I'm asked many questions about theory of instruction. Why this? Why that? Why is it so difficult to read? In its own foreword. So it's a very difficult book to read, but that's where a lot of it comes from. And then cross-reference with a lot of cognitive science and behavioral psychology. But one particular bit that I think is game-changing from Engelmann and Carnine's ideas is their analysis of cognitive learning. So this image, if you've never seen it, is a portion of the universe of mathematics that was created by Complete Maths. And I think it's a pretty good depiction of how we think about mathematics. We think about mathematics as thousands of different ideas that need to be learned. And that is fair. There are thousands of different ideas that do need to be learned, and they have many connections to them as well. So then we conclude, Well, that means there are thousands of different things about mathematics that I need to learn how to teach. Thousands of different things. And then it's not really thousands of different things, because to take a couple of examples from the secondary sector, expanding a pair of brackets, but also probably in primary, sharing a quantity into a ratio. For each of those, I can, off the top of my head, think of 5 different ways of teaching kids how to do those things. And then there are people who will say to us, actually, you should teach multiple methods to students. And a lot of the rationale behind that often seems to be because we think different things will make sense to different kids. We're not really sure what will work for different children. So we should teach them lots of different methods in the hope that some of it sticks for different people. And so then that means there are tens of thousands of things that we have to learn how to teach. And then, okay, so I'm going to try teaching a thing and I might not get it right first time. So maybe I can learn from the experience. When do I get to try this again? Give it another go. Usually it's next year, a year later, if we're lucky. So not even that necessarily if you're moving between the year groups that you teach in the primary sector. And so now suddenly I get 30, 40 chances, maybe tops, with a year or so in between each opportunity across a 3-4 decade career to figure out how to perfectly teach tens of thousands of different things. And quite suddenly, why teaching mathematics in a way that every child can be successful, it seems to make sense why that feels like a really impossible task. And so what's really brilliant about Engelmann and Carnine's work, almost more than anything, is they don't say there are thousands of things to learn. Or more precisely, they say each one of these things, you can pick it apart. When you pick it apart, what we call atomizing, when you do that, it turns out that every single one of them will be composed of some combination of these same 4, what we're going to call, to extend the metaphor, atomic elements every time. The same 4. And in the book itself, there are these, this is their picture of their analysis of cognitive learning. And I think a simpler way to structure it is to look at it like this. Step 1, analyze the knowledge. So here's the thing that you're going to try and teach kids. What are its constituent atoms? What are the elements that make it up? Because once you know that for each element, there is the way that you communicate it can be effectively the same every time. So what the knowledge is informs the type of communication, and it's basically more or less the same communication structure every single time, which means you don't have to learn tens of thousands of things to teach in mathematics. You only need to learn about 4. And that feels an awful lot more manageable. And then the final part of the process, analyze the response. Give students something to respond to. Do they respond the way that we expect them to? If they do, that's great. We can probably move on. If they don't, then we don't blame the student or say there's something wrong with their brain. Instead, we infer there was something wrong with the communication. It doesn't matter that 2/3 of the group got it right and 1/3 didn't. 2/3 of the group got it right despite us, not because of us. Every time I do the Glurm demo, some people get it right. Some people say the right thing. Lots of people say the wrong thing. And it's because of my communication, not because there's anything wrong with their brains. So we go back and we reanalyze the communication, we tweak it, and we try again. So now we'll look briefly at the first of these now over the next 10 minutes or so, categoricals, what that is and how to communicate them. So it's the first of those 4 elements. And to identify them, effectively, if you can meaningfully ask the question, is this an X? Then X is a categorical concept. So for example, gradient is not a categorical because I can't meaningfully ask the question, is this a gradient? And solving an equation, it's not a categorical concept because I can't meaningfully ask the question, is this a solving an equation? But equation is a categorical concept because I can meaningfully ask the question, is this an equation? Yes or no? Prism is a categorical concept because I can meaningfully ask the question, is this a prism? And histogram, that's another categorical because I can meaningfully ask, is this a histogram? But find the mean from a histogram, that's not categorical. I can't meaningfully ask that as a question. Is this a find the mean from a histogram? Doesn't make sense. So we can take, say, 60 seconds tops to give that a go. Here are a bunch of different things that we might want to teach in maths. For each one, just write down, hoping you got pen and paper to hand, yes or no, is it a categorical concept? Another 30 seconds. Okay, we'll try it this way. If you have access to the chat channel, could you just type in sort of vertically? It's not going to be hard. You can just do it horizontally, YN for each one. Whether you think, so you can just type it all in one go. Whether you think they're categorical, yes or no. Thanks, Phil. Okay, we've got everything through there. Okay, so now we can contrast that with these answers here. It looks like that was 100%. Brilliant. Okay, so now we can identify categoricals. How do we communicate them? That is the next thing that we have to do. First and foremost, we don't just show an example, as we've already talked about, and then talk about that example a little bit. We don't even show many examples. We're going to use the concept of triangle here. We have to use non-examples, but as I hinted at earlier, it used to be that we could say, hey, use non-examples, and that was a revelation. But actually, you can use them well or not so well. So one way of not using them so well, which you may have seen before, when I just went to Google, I typed in examples and non-examples, and then went to Google Images. And then the very first image I came up was this one. This is kind of taking a whole bunch of examples and I guess non-examples plus other stuff totally at random and just throws them at the kids all at once. Or I can imagine ask kids to sort them in this way. It's a shame because there's some good ones in here. This is a really, really good non-example, but this would be very overloading for most people. So what we're going to do instead, we propose, or Engelmann and Carnine propose, that we use what they call an initial instructional sequence. So to communicate the concept triangle, this would mean a sequence of examples and non-examples, one at a time. And as a rule of thumb, they would follow this pattern, usually. A negative example first, followed by a positive example, followed by another positive example, another positive example, and then a negative example. This structure is now often abbreviated to just NPPPN. And I'll show an example of what a good initial instructional sequence could look like for communicating the concept of triangle. What is a triangle? Okay, I'm going to teach you what we mean by the word triangle. To start, for example, this is not a triangle, but this is a triangle. This is a triangle, and this is a triangle, but this is not a triangle. We have the negative followed by positive, 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 negative, NPPPN. And I think we have time. We're going to take this one step further, because what I'm now going to do is share with you a second instructional sequence. And like this one, it will have 5 examples in total, and they will be structured NPPPN. But my second example is going to be a bad initial instructional sequence, not a good one, because there are 4 principles of instruction that should be used each time in the design of these sequences. So my good example that I just went through adhered to all 4 of those principles. This next one does not adhere to any of them. So, and afterwards we'll play a game of spot the difference. Okay, so I'm going to teach you what we mean by the word triangle. So to start off, this isn't a triangle. Obviously not a triangle, because we've seen this before, and we all know that this one's a rectangle. It's got 4 sides. It's obviously a rectangle. But this is a triangle. It's got 3 sides, unlike the rectangle, and the red thing doesn't matter. Like here, we've got one that's black and not red. That doesn't really matter either. It's still a triangle. Same as this one. This one is also a triangle. Kind of, I know it's sort of filled in now. It doesn't have an outline. It's sort of all orange. Just ignore that. That doesn't matter. That doesn't change the fact that it's a triangle. And then finally, this isn't a this is you've even seen this one before. This is actually a shape called a pentagon. So pentagons have 5 sides, not like the rectangle and the triangle. But actually, ignore. Look, we're going to look at pentagons better next week. Ignore what I was just saying. What really matters at this point is just that is not a triangle. So yeah, it's not a triangle, and then that's not a triangle. But these ones here, these are all triangles. Okay, we can go on mics off again. There were 4 meaningful distinctions between those 2 sequences. What were they?
You were far too wordy in your second one.
Yeah, everyone else likes that one.
All your 3 triangles are incredibly similar in shape and orientation.
Correct. That's the second one.
You were teaching a new concept with the pentagon as well, whereas actually your focus was on the triangles.
That's very true. Absolutely. So I've moved on too far there.
You didn't just stick with the word triangle, you used other language as well.
Mm-hmm. We've still got 2 out of the 4. Any others?
There were some non-important features in the second set, like features that weren't germane to the definition of a triangle.
That is very true. So we've got things that are irrelevant that have been thrown in there and varied all over. That actually gives us a third principle. And there's one last one. We've talked a lot about the positives, the positive examples.
Your negative examples aren't triangle-like.
Yeah.
They're totally different.
Yeah, exactly. My negatives are quite close to the positives here, but not in the negative, not in the bad sequence. So we've got the 4. We'll go through them one by one. First one, don't change irrelevant features. In this case, like color. So here, all the irrelevant features are kept quite constant. That helps to reduce informational noise. It helps direct students' attention to what matters. I don't know how familiar everybody already is with the cognitive science model of working memory and long-term memory. But in a nutshell, if working memory is very, very, very constrained for everybody, some of us actually have a little bit more working memory available than others. Some of us have a little bit less than others. It's constrained for everybody. But the more we're asking people to attend to and think about and process all in one go, the more likely they're just going to miss everything. So here we reduce the informational noise. We just focus their attention on the things that actually matter. So this is, again, part of the reason this is not a great way of explaining what a triangle is. There's too much variation in things that are actually relevant here. It is just all over the place. So don't change irrelevant features like color. The second, the one that everybody enjoys and picks up on pretty quickly, use the same words to present each example. So for each of these that I presented, very simple, very consistent wording every time. And yes, for the bad example, it was all over the place. Those first two principles apply to the whole sequence, top to bottom. They apply to everything. The next two principles apply to the specific examples that we choose and how we sequence them as well. So the next one, for positive examples, show maximal variation. And in the constraints of our first principle, vary them as much as possible. So here, yes, we just had three right angle triangles, all oriented the same way. You'd leave thinking that triangles always look like this. Here, we've tried to show differently shaped triangles in different orientations. And then finally, final principle, between the positives and negatives, show very minimal variation. So yes, between this and this, they look very different. This and this, they look very different. Whereas here, small change. And here, very small change. And then suddenly it's no longer a triangle. By doing that, so with the positives, varying them a lot, we're showing the range of what the concept could be. And then here, we're kind of putting a limit on that range. This tiny change suddenly means it's no longer a triangle. So that gives us those four principles. So these are the first 4 out of 5 principles of instruction. The first is, the names for these are quite difficult to remember. But that first one, don't vary irrelevant features. That's called the setup principle. The second one is the easiest to remember. It's called the wording principle. Don't vary the words. The third one, the one about maximal variation in the positives, it's called the sameness principle because what we're doing is varying our positives loads, but we're treating them the same each time. Even though I've made this look totally different, it is still a triangle. I'm still saying, yes, it's a triangle, treating it the same. If I have loads of positive examples or some positive examples and they vary massively, but I'm still treating it the same way and saying, yes, this is an example, there must be something that is the same about them all. And that's what we're communicating. Whereas the next one is referred to as the difference principle. So this is where we have a small variation between positive and negative, and yet that small variation means we treat it differently. Suddenly, it's not a triangle or it's not an example of the concept. So there must be something about that difference that is meaningful and is important, and suddenly means it's no longer an example of the concept. And then there is a fifth principle as well. However, that brings us to the end of what we have time for today. So that will have to remain a mystery. Phil, would you like to take it from there? We have a couple of options. Option number one, I can actually give an exercise, an activity for everyone to try now to construct one of these sequences. Option number two, we can take questions from you or from the audience.
I think let's start with questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or alternatively put the question in the chat. But to start with, I had one question, which is, I think this approach to me is clearly applicable to different subjects and phases. But I guess the applicability, there's kind of a spectrum of applicability in the sense of, it seems, the mindset of the really ambitious mindset of getting 100% for every student is clearly applicable. And also to me, the idea of logically faultless communication is clearly applicable. I guess do you think there are some aspects of the approach that differ depending on the subject, and specifically the idea of breaking down subjects into atoms? Do you think that some subjects are more easily broken down than others?
So they are. I need to explain several concepts to make sense of this, but I'll give it a go. The first that is really important is the distinction between substantive and disciplinary knowledge. So the easiest example to understand comes from science. In science, things that are scientific facts or scientific truths or scientific laws, things we've figured out about science, like Newton's three laws of motion or the ways that chemicals react, that is all substantive knowledge or substantive content. Disciplinary knowledge is how scientists think and how they behave in order to discover all of those ideas about science. And that breakdown exists for a lot of different subjects. So with mathematics, it's the same. Pretty much all the content we teach in school is substantive. But professional mathematicians are obviously not having a teacher hand them some work to do. They're doing some work to discover new ideas about mathematics. So the way they do that, conjecture, inquiry, problem solving, etc., that's disciplinary. History, what we know or think we know about the past, that is substantive. How historians have come to know it, that is disciplinary. So different subjects in our examinations, they prioritize the substantive and the disciplinary differently. So speaking about the GCSE exams, the maths exam is fully 100% substantive. Science is 90% substantive, 95%. It tries to creep in a little bit of the disciplinary as well. Languages, 100% substantive. English almost goes the other direction. Very little of it is substantive content. And very often it is trying to promote thinking skills, writing skills, what are called reading skills. That is baked into the way we assess the subject. Doesn't have to be, but it's what has been chosen by people. And then history and geography are a bit of a 50-50 mix of the two almost. The next thing is the distinction between a quality and a difficulty-based assessment paradigm. So a difficulty-based assessment paradigm, mathematics again is the purest example of this. It's like doing a high jump. The way you get people to compete in the high jump and see who's better, you just have a bar, you get them to jump over it, and then you raise the bar again. And you keep going until one person can no longer clear the bar. Maths exams are set up like that. We ask 100 questions, and those questions get harder the further you get to the end. And while, yeah, some people will pick up a few marks at the end, really, the goal is to try to keep making it harder and harder until they basically tap out and can't get any further. Whereas the alternative is something more like Strictly Come Dancing. You go out there and you do your one big performance, and then multiple people assess the quality of your performance. And that, again, is how English exams at the other extreme tend to operate. You get about 4 questions, 30 marks each, and you're being assessed on the quality of your writing. And usually multiple people have to moderate that assessment as well. And then I think the final thing I need to explain is the distinction between convergent and divergent learning intentions. So in a math classroom, if you gave all the kids it's a little exit ticket to do before they leave the classroom, final question, check that they got the content. If all of them, every single one of them, wrote down the exact same answer and the exact same working to get that answer, you would call that a massive win. I've completely succeeded in teaching this to those kids, assuming you're able to prevent them from cheating and copying. On the other hand, if you asked all your kids to write a sentence or a paragraph about something before they left, and they all handed in exactly the same words, word for word, hang on, something weird's happened here. What on earth has happened here? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't feel good. So in maths, we have very convergent learning intentions. We want everyone to learn and do the same thing. In English, we intuitively want them to be more creative and expressive and do different things, but sort of within constraints. All those different things, having a substantive focus, a difficulty assessment, and convergent learning intentions, they tend to line up. Having a more disciplinary focus, a quality-based assessment paradigm, and convergent learning intentions, they tend to line up. And the more substantive difficulty based and importantly convergent a subject is in its school manifestation, the much more amenable it is to this kind of analysis. So the sciences are very amenable to it. Languages are very amenable to it. When you get to the humanities, some of the content is very amenable to it. But at least as far as I'm aware, I don't think the more disciplinary stuff is. Now, back to English, it sort of depends because some parts of English actually are very, they do actually fall on that spectrum of convergent. Things like spelling, grammar, punctuation, writing a technically correct sentence rather than one that is expressive. Tom Needham in particular is very good at this. He's a secondary English teacher, but he's drawing from the same body of research and thinking about how to apply it specifically to English in the secondary context. So, and then finally, for those subjects that do prioritize creativity, inquiry, problem solving, divergent thinking, etc., all of those outcomes are predicated on having a load of the substantive knowledge. So you kind of still need that before you can get to that bit. So the short answer is yes, it applies across the board. And there's a bit more detail there about how it might apply differently across different subjects across the spectrum.
Oh, that's really interesting. That was an interesting answer as a kind of example of how to very clearly articulate something complex by kind of like substantiating some of the background thinking. So thank you. I'd never actually thought about that. While thinking about the assessment of English being similar to high jump and assessment of maths being more gradual. That's a really like interesting point. That was awesome. I have one final question, I think, to round off the session, which is, do you use this approach in your own learning? I'd be interested to know general, like as in, so I think I use this in my own, like I use some of these approaches in my own learning. But I was just intrigued to know whether you do yourself.
Do you mean if I'm trying to learn something myself?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about, I don't know if like, you know, maybe around your like knowledge diet in general and how you think about this in relation to, yeah, generally how you try to learn yourself.
I think it informs some of how I try to learn. I think it looks different in its application for a variety of reasons. The ways in which it informs it. Sometimes if I'm reading a description of something, then I might ask myself the question, okay, well, what if we change this? Would that not be that then? Or I'm very aware of my own uncertainty because I realize I'm sort of asking about edge cases, but what if we change that little bit or that little bit? Does that still apply? Yes or no? ChatGPT has actually been pretty good for that because I can sometimes push it and depending on whether or not you can trust it, it will at least give you an answer. And so I think there are ways of pushing it to give true answers. I'm also hyper aware of when I don't understand something. And I think a lot of people in society more broadly blame themselves when they don't understand something. I think there's probably a lot of insecurity going around about how smart people feel, possibly hang-ups from our experiences in school. And I think also, just as a casual observation of society, quite often people will answer questions I found when they don't know what the answer is, but someone's asked them for whatever reason, and then they'll give an answer, and they have no idea what the answer is. And then if their answer was unsatisfactory, I find myself like probing more. Wait, well, what about this? What about this? And I can almost see them starting to feel flustered and almost intimidated by that because what's happening there is they're getting caught out. They're getting caught out in the lie of having pretended they knew. And it's interesting that they feel like they have to pretend that they know. Whereas I've reached a point where I certainly go very much the other way around now. If I don't know or understand something, I'm not sure I ever blame myself for that. I always think that must be a function of the experience or what is being communicated to me. And now maybe I'll see what I can do to try and improve upon that or figure out what's missing. If I care enough, I'm going to invest it. So it doesn't manifest in me constructing NPPPN sequences for myself, but I guess it gets reinterpreted and filtered in that way.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've been learning Chinese lately, and I've been trying to use the Michelle Thomas method, which I know is sort of partly related to this in terms of thinking
I've
about.
done the first 2 lessons of Mandarin Chinese on Michelle Thomas. They're pretty good. But I didn't get further than that because of time. It was 10 years ago.
Fair enough.
But I have done, I got a bit further with Urdu because my wife's Pakistani heritage with Pimsleur, which uses the same method. So if you ever go through a course like the European ones in particular, French, Spanish, German, Italian, Michelle Thomas and Pimsleur, it's absolutely fascinating to see the same kind of methodology, which is all the same as what I'm talking about here. They use the same ideas, applied in 2 different ways. And they're actually both slightly good at different things. And with the Urdu one, there isn't a Michelle Thomas version. And the deficiencies in the Pimsleur method and the Pimsleur courses, I was able to make up for a lot with ChatGPT by knowing what questions to ask ChatGPT, thanks to Michelle Thomas. So that helped a lot.
Interesting. I'd actually be really interested to get into the differences between Pimsleur and Michelle Thomas. I might look that up after this.
It'd be a different conversation for a different group, maybe.